Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It is that time of the month again. It is time for the monthly wrap up where I tell you all the books that I have read in January. This month has felt really long. I've had such a good reading month. I read 10 books this month. And when I think about it, I actually can't think of another time that I've read as many books as 10 in a month. So I'm really pleased with that number. And as we all know, January is a bleak month. So what I did was I just stayed inside pretty much all of January and read. And I have found some amazing books this month. There are so many 4 and 5-star books in this list. So I'm so pleased that I did that and discovered some new favorite books. Now, unfortunately, I do not have any of my books, and I feel like a broken record saying this. I feel like I've said this in the past like 3 videos, but I am moving house and all of my books are packed away. I did try to rummage through the boxes to get out the books, but I think I got about 3 in and I was making such a mess. I was like, do you know what? I'll just put a picture of the cover here so you can see what it looks like, but hopefully you don't mind too much about that. So I will tell you my first book that I read this month, and this was like so long ago, but this was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, and this book has been doing the absolute rounds. It's been so popular and I can completely see why. For those who don't know, it's about our 2 main characters, Sadie and Sam, and they are games designers in around the 90s, but it does talk about their whole sort of life from being children to being grown adults. And this book was so imaginative. My favourite element of this book, like many others, was definitely the gaming theme throughout. But what I loved so much about it was watching Sadie and Sam come up with these games ideas. They were so creative and it was almost like a narrative within a narrative. And I just thought it was just so imaginative and magical, and I just loved that element. As well as that, I also thought this book was a really great one to read in January because Sadie and Sam work so hard together to make these games. It really inspires you to work hard yourself, and I feel that's a really good way to start the year when you're thinking about what you want to achieve this year, and just seeing them work so hard on something they're so passionate about really inspired me at the beginning of the year, which made it such a great reading experience. So I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I really did enjoy it a lot. Then the next book I read is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This is a dark academia book, and again, a really popular one. So I was super keen to get to it, and I'm so glad that I finally did because I really enjoyed it. It's about a group of students, a group of theatre students who are all in their final year at college, and they're all studying Shakespeare. So there are so many Shakespeare quotes throughout this book, and you watch them act out lots of Shakespeare plays. And because this book is like a murder mystery, one of the theatre students is murdered. There's this real feeling of tension and suspense throughout the whole book. And when that's paired with those Shakespeare plays, because Shakespeare plays are very tragic, it really serves to heighten that tension, and throughout you're just wanting to know what happens. And I really loved the reveal at the end of how this person was murdered, who did it, how they did it. I thought that reveal was really satisfying. So I love this book, and I love the setting of the college. It was just impeccable dark academia vibes. So if you haven't read it, I highly recommend. I gave that book also a 4 out of 5 stars. So then my next 5 books were all part of a challenge that I did. I will link that video down below. Just to note as well, all of these books are actually featured in different videos that I've done previously this month. So I will link them all down below if you're wanting a more in-depth sort of description of the books. But yeah, these next 5 books were all part of a reading challenge that I did of reading 5 books in 5 days. And I was so proud of myself for this one. And I also found some such amazing books. I was very tactical with this challenge, and they're all quite short books. So if you're in the market for some short books, then do listen up because there's some great ones here. So the first one that I read was Small Things Like These. And again, this book has been really popular. It was nominated for the Booker Prize, and I can completely see why. It's such a little short book. I read it in about an hour and a half, and it is about a man living in Ireland in the 1980s, and he is a coal deliverer. Fairly successful. He's got a family that he wants to support. There's a lot of money troubles at that time, but he's doing okay. And on his rounds of delivering coal, he discovers something that he should probably speak up about or, you know, intervene to help. But it's that sort of inner conflict between wanting to help and maybe suffering the consequences, or keeping your head down and looking after your family. And that's all I'll say about it, because I think because it is such a short book, I don't want to ruin it, but I thought it was so great. I loved the writing style in this book. It was like no nonsense, no frills, straight to the point, not a word was wasted, and I really, really enjoyed that book a lot. So yeah, I gave the book a 5 out of 5 stars actually, really, really enjoyed it. And then the next book that I read was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. And I'm so glad I finally got around to reading this book. I feel like I've been meaning to read it for so long, and I'm kind of annoyed I didn't read it any sooner because it was amazing. The way that Ocean Vuong puts words together is just like incredible. I don't know how he does it, but the way he writes words and puts them together is just the most beautiful thing ever. I know that first and foremost he is a poet, and you can just so tell in his writing. It's about it's a man writing to his illiterate Vietnamese mother about his life as a child, as a teenager, sort of growing up, and it's so tragic and beautiful, and just, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars purely for the writing alone. It was just unparalleled, and if you haven't read it, you just need to read it to experience Ocean Vuong's writing. And now I cannot wait to go out and buy some of his poetry, because if it's half as good as that book, then I'm in for a treat. Then the next book that I read was Assembly, and again, this is one that I wanted to get to for so long, and again, it did not disappoint. It was a really interesting little book. Again, just such a short one. I read it in about an hour and a half, but the conversations and the topics that were brought up in this book were really interesting and made me sit back and stop and think, which I always think is a good sign in a book. It's about a young black woman who is a banker in London, and there's conversations around capitalism, colonialism, wealth in the UK. Her boyfriend is this white, old money, rich boyfriend, and it's that juxtaposition between the rich and the poor, new money, old money. And I just thought it was such an interesting little book, and I really loved the reading experience of reading this book. I found that I really enjoy reading books that you can just sit down and read in one sitting. It really just immerses you in the book so much, and for that I loved it. So I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Highly recommend. Can you tell I've had such a good reading month? All these books have been 4 or 5 stars. I was so pleased with everything that I've read this month. And the next book I read, again, was so amazing. Another favourite of mine now, and that was Cannery Row by John Steinbeck. I've not heard too much about this book, but I loved East of Eden by John Steinbeck so much, so I thought, why not read some more from him? And this book was so good. It's about a road called Cannery Row, and it's just by the sea, and reading this book was such a sensory experience. He describes the sounds, sights, smells, tastes. It's in this sort of gritty atmosphere as well. I loved all the characters so much. I really connected with them. He talks about all the different people living and working on Cannery Row. So there's a convenience store owner, there's a brothel owner, there's like a lone scientist, a group of men who make loads of bad decisions, and I just found them all so endearing, and I just really loved this book a lot, and I loved seeing all the people on this road sort of come together, and it was just, yeah, it was really, really great. I loved it. I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. And I'm slowly realising that John Steinbeck is an author that I just love, so I'm so excited to read some more from him. And then the final short book that I read as part of my 5-book challenge was The Pachinko Parlor. And this book was probably my least favourite out of the 5 short books that I did read this month, just purely because I didn't connect with the main character all that much. It's a French book translated, so it's about a French woman who goes to live with her Korean grandparents who are now living in Japan after they fled from the civil war in Korea. And I just thought the main character, the girl, she just turned 30, she's having a bit of an identity crisis, I think, but she's just being so mean to her grandparents, and I just couldn't relate to her. I didn't get why she was acting like that. There were some really good elements in this book, like for example, she babysits this young girl while she's staying there in Japan, and I loved their relationship and how they interacted, but I wish it could have been fleshed out a little bit more, delved into a little bit more. But I do think there's a real audience for this book. Like if you love that Japanese setting, talking about the mundane, like her grandparents are still working, they have a pachinko parlor. Like if you do like that sort of setting, then I definitely say still read it. I just personally didn't connect with the main character, but I can completely see that some people would really like this book. So I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. So still not mad that I read it, but just not one of my favorites this month. And then the next book that I read was Stoner. This book again has been so popular. I've not heard a single bad review about this book, so I was really intrigued to read it. And again, I just loved it. It's a very quiet book. It's about a man named William Stoner, who is an English professor in America. He's quite a reserved man, quite a quiet man, and it just talks about his life. It's a very beautifully quiet book. It talks about his relationship with his wife and his daughter. He's in sort of a loveless, complicated marriage, which I found so frustrating to read about because I did not like the wife. I thought she was so mean. But then again, I just loved reading about how they interact and how they've gone from this newlywed couple to then, you know, years down the line, sort of how they deal with each other living under the same roof. I found that really interesting and I love that. And this book talks about Stoner's life all the way from when he was a young boy to the day that he died. So you really get to know Stoner really well. And yeah, I just love this book. It was a real character study and I just really enjoyed it. So yeah, I give this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Highly recommend. And then the next book that I read was American Gods by Neil Gaiman. And again, this is another favourite of mine. I was so shocked at how much I love this book. It's a hefty one, let me say. It is a big one. But I didn't even notice. I honestly enjoyed reading every single second of it. When I explain the premise, it sounds quite complicated. I feel like I can't do it justice, but it is so creative and imaginative. This book is basically surrounding gods and who we as a society worship. So it harks back to, you know, Loki, Odin, are like Norse mythology sort of gods that we know and love and all that sort of realm. But then it goes to modern day gods and things that we worship now, like technology and computers and that sort of thing. And it's based on the premise that when we forget about certain gods through either just time or history or relevance, when people stop talking about them and we forget about them as a society, then they sort of die and disappear. And it's this war between the old gods and the new gods, and they're fighting to be relevant. And it's centered around this man called Shadow, who is released from prison and thrust into the world of these gods. And I just thought it was so great. There was a lot of magical realism in this book, which I really enjoyed and think worked so well. I loved Neil Gaiman's writing. I loved all the different American settings. They sort of travel around America, and there's one where he's in this like really small, freezing cold American town. I just thought it was great, and I really love Neil Gaiman's writing. So yeah, I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And then the 10th and final book that I read this month was On the Road by Jack Kerouac, which is an absolute classic. I'm sure you've all heard about it. And this book is just a typical classic road trip book. It is centered around 2 main characters, Dean and Sal, who have this real itch to just go out and see the world. Dean is the most chaotic character I have read about in quite some time, and Sal really looks up to him. Dean is just, yeah, he just brings chaos wherever he goes, but he's got a real sense of adventure, and Sal wants to be like him too. So they hitchhike, they get old rickety cars that aren't very reliable, and they just go and see America and travel it. This book is mostly all set on the road, and it's just showing that real sense of being young, not wanting responsibilities, just wanting to go out and see the world. And for that, I thought it was just so great. A real American classic. Again, like American Gods, there's so many great American settings that are described in this book, which I really enjoyed. So I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars as well. So you can see that I had such a good reading month, so many amazing books that I loved so much. So hopefully, fingers crossed, February will be just as good. We'll see. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.